In this video, we're going to discuss some foundational issues related to health psychology. Most basically, what is health psychology in the first place? When I talk about health psychology, I mean the area of psychology that looks at the interplay between psychology and physical health. And it looks at two types of relationships. First, it looks at the effects of physical health on psychological functioning. So, for example, people with diabetes might have a lot to cope with, so a health psychologist might study how people adjust to living with diabetes. The other side of health psychology looks at the effects of psychological factors on physical health, such as how your beliefs, your attitudes, your moods, your emotions, and your behaviors affect your physical health. Health psychology covers four main topics. First, health psychologists are interested in the promotion and maintenance of health. According to the World Health Organization, health is not just an absence of illness, but a complete state of physical, mental, and social well-being. Health psychologists are also interested in the prevention and treatment of illness. In the next video, we'll talk about how illness was treated throughout history. Now we recognize that in addition to treating illness at the cellular or biological level, we also need to treat it at a psychological and social level too. Third, health psychologists are interested in the identification and causes of health, illness, and dysfunction. In particular, since this is psychology, health psychologists are interested in how beliefs, attitudes, emotions, and relationships lead to health and illness. Fourth, health psychologists are interested in the analysis and improvement of the healthcare system. For example, how should doctors and nurses be trained to best ensure that patients adhere to their medication? What is the effect of large health maintenance organizations on overall health, and so forth? Now let me give you two intriguing examples of research findings that make no sense at all unless you accept that psychological factors can affect people's health. We'll talk more about each of these findings in other videos. The first example comes from research that looked at the relationship between people's views about aging at one point and then how healthy they were over the next 20 years. In this study, 660 people were interviewed in 1975 when they were about 50 years old. These people answered 5 questions, which measured the subjects' views about aging. The questions basically just gauged whether they had positive views about aging or negative ones, and whether they thought of aging as a good thing or a bad thing. 2 examples of these questions are: as you get older, you get less useful, and things keep getting worse as I get older. Endorsement of those statements would indicate a negative view about aging. And from these 5 questions, the researchers divided their subjects into those who had a positive view about aging and those who had a negative view about aging. Then they looked at their health over the next 22 years. And you're going to see in this course that there are a lot of ways to measure health. And some of those ways you won't be too impressed with, but I think you'll approve of the measure of health used in this study, which was mortality. In other words, how much longer did they live after the initial interviews? They found that subjects who had a negative view of aging way back in 1975 lived on an average of 15 more years. Subjects who had a positive view of aging in 1975, on the other hand, lived on an average of 22 more years, which is a 7-year difference. So just by having more positive views about aging, it appears that people live longer. So this tells us that our beliefs actually affect our physical health. In the second example, a researcher looked at a bunch of people who had achieved something really great, specifically getting elected governor of an American state. This researcher used the biographical directory of U.S. governors and counted 1,672 governors who had already died. He looked at how old they were when they were elected and how old they were when they died, and he found that the younger these governors were when they were elected, the younger they were when they died. This doesn't bode too well for Bill Clinton, who was elected governor at age 32 and was Arkansas's second youngest governor and third youngest president ever elected. Although he's getting up there in years and he seems to be doing all right. So how did this researcher explain this? Well, he argued that two things are important here. First, a certain type of personality helps people achieve things early, but is also harmful to people's health. What he's talking about here is type A personality, which is a combination of hostility, competitiveness, and time pressure or urgency. We'll discuss personality types, including type A personality, and how these personality types relate to our health later on in the course. Secondly, he claims that achieving your life's ambitions at a young age causes you to lose your reason for being and your motivation to stay healthy. The researcher also found the same relationship in samples of presidents, Supreme Court justices, signers of the U.S. Declaration of Independence, popes, and Nobel Prize winners. So the younger you were when you achieved whatever it was that you wanted to achieve, the younger you were when you died, leading to the researcher to state that an early rise may lead to an early fall. So the second intriguing finding is that early achievers die young. And what this tells us is that your personality and motivation affect your health. Looking at these examples today, you really need health psychology if you're to understand how these things can happen. To make sense of these intriguing findings, you need to believe that psychological factors like beliefs, personality, and motivation, can affect people's health. All these non-physical things do affect people's physical health, and by the end of this course, I hope you'll be pretty convinced of this. I want to finish this video by reminding you about one important point about research methods, because it's going to come up in this class repeatedly. Specifically, I want to talk about the correlation fallacy. You've heard this probably many times before. Correlation does not mean causation. The correlation fallacy is seeing a correlation and assuming it tells you something about causation, about whether one thing causes the other. This just isn't true. Correlations can only tell you if two things are associated with one another. That is, if they happen together or if they're somehow related to one another. They don't tell you if one event causes the other. It could be that one event causes the other, or it could be the reverse of that. It could also be that some other thing causes both events. That some other thing is called a confound, or a third variable. So for example, ice cream sales and murder rates are highly correlated with one another. You might explain this by claiming that murderers enjoy eating ice cream after they go on a murderous killing spree. You might also explain this as people who eat a lot of ice cream get brain freezes, and these brain freezes lead them to go into murderous rampages. Neither of these two possibilities seem too likely. Really, the correlation between these two variables is due to a third variable, a confound, which is temperature. As heat rises, people become both more aggressive and more likely to eat ice cream. If you want to show causality, you need to do a true experiment. In a true experiment, something is manipulated, something is measured, and everything else is held constant. Then any changes you find in the thing you measure have to be caused by the thing that you manipulated. Holding everything else constant means that you have to control for every possible potential confound. You have to make sure each possible confound is represented equally in your 2 or however many groups of subjects. To ensure this, all you have to do is use random assignment to the conditions of your study. By random assignment to conditions, all I mean is that you decide beforehand, before you even lay eyes on your subject, what condition they're going to be in. You can flip a coin before your subject arrives. Maybe heads means one condition, and tails means the other condition. If you do that, even confounds you haven't even thought of should end up evenly distributed between the 2 conditions in the long run. Random assignment to conditions is a requirement for a true experiment. Without it, you can't make statements about causality. Easy enough, except for that a lot of things we care about in health psychology, it's simply not possible to randomly assign people to conditions. Think about studies linking some behavior to health, say drinking wine and heart disease. To do a true experiment to see if drinking wine causes heart disease, you would have to randomly assign your subjects to drink a certain amount of wine a day for many decades and then see who gets heart disease. Clearly, it would be unethical to do things like this in our research.